as usual, I was banging the drum of stuff that I think needs to happen in Commander games. And one of the biggest things is I think players need to build decks responsibly. And the two axes of responsible deck building that I try to bang the drum about the most is having enough draw power to get two cards in your deck and having enough removal to stop people from ending you in the middle of a game of Commander. So apparently there are some people who desperately disagree with those edicts when it comes to Magic the Gathering, at least for Commander games, and I want to go ahead and answer some of those comments. Now, a quick disclaimer. This is not me trying to shit on any of the people who have commented on my stuff. If you're watching my stuff, thank you very much for the view. I greatly appreciate it, and this channel literally does not work without help from all of you. So, again, thank you for watching, and I appreciate that. However, this is one thing that I actually do believe very, very wholeheartedly in because of the amount of Commander that I do get to play at my LGS and the variety of people in various playgroups that I get to play with across multiple shops in the North Georgia area. So with that all out of the way, let's go ahead and get to the first one. This one was on my recent video. There's a few that are on the recent podcast that I did about this as well, but this one says 10 to 15 pieces? Geez, that's going overboard. That's basically like 1/5 of the cards, not counting lands. And yes, that is about 1/5 of the cards, and that's fine. Having parts of your deck dedicated to solving various problems is not a bad thing. That's not a terrible way to play the game at all. At least, so I say that as somebody who builds a lot of decks in general. Let's look at my full power Sephiroth deck as an example. If we are looking at the removal package of the deck only, there's 15 pieces of dedicated removal. But in that package, one goes into the dungeon, one can mill myself, giving me the ability to get more stuff. Playcrafter and Demon's Disciple have the ability to trigger the commander. Cathar Commando triggers the commander over and over again. Angel of Ruins has plane cycling, which triggers the commander. And Archon of Cruelty is its own draw engine. Hagra Mauling also gets to double as its own land if it needs to. So even though there are 15 removal pieces in this deck, there are still a lot of cards that have other synergies within the deck. And I think that's something that people might forget about when deck building. It's okay to have a deck that is able to answer a lot of things, so long as the answers you are doing are still on theme with what your deck is going for. You're not just playing a control deck because it has a lot of control pieces. You're playing a deck that has certain synergies. Like, even if we go up to the board wipe section of the deck, Massacre Worm is a win condition for the deck. Elish Norn is a reanimation target. Ondu Inversion has the ability to be a land when you need it to. Dam can modally be targeted removal if it desperately needs to. Cataclysmic Gearholt can re-trigger the commander, and Nevinral Urborg Tyrant can get rid of cards like Omniscience and other things that normal board wipes cannot get rid of, which can put you in a better state if somebody's about to just win the game and go off. It's okay to stop people from winning the game because people are going to stop you from winning the game. Like, stopping somebody from winning the game can be as simple as putting a blocker in front of their double striking commander. That can be a type of, stopping somebody from winning the game. And how far are we going to actually go down the realm of we don't allow players to, we allow players to win the game, we don't allow players to win the game? How far are we allowed to go down that route before we just start letting people arms race themselves into the fastest deck possible? So that's the other thing. When players don't run removal, the incentive becomes win quickly. It becomes this battle cruiser style game where everybody is trying to assemble their board state faster. The downside of assembling a board state quickly is that if somebody removes a piece from it, then you just kind of lost. I have a $15 Rakdos deck that I've talked about on my channel before, and you can check that out if you want, but I recently got to play a game where I busted out a bunch of my $15 decks and distributed them around a table at my LGS. And that deck overperformed in the first 5 turns. It vomited the entire handout by discounting the costs of Eldrazi and reanimating a whole bunch of things. It managed to get a very powerful board state. However, The board state was removed piece by piece by everybody else's cards, and then the deck fell off. It didn't have the ability to fight anymore, because the player who was piloting the deck did not have the ability yet to close out the game with the board state that they had. Now, that wasn't necessarily their fault. Everybody else had assembled blockers of some variety, and because I built all of my decks with plenty of removal, it was all the decks were able to find some way to answer that board state one piece at a time, and then eventually the Rakdos deck was able to be taken care of in that game. The downside of having a deck that goes off quickly as you arms race your deck up is that removal will inevitably turn your deck off, and you end up having to build a more resilient deck. This makes removal more of a deck building puzzle than I think players are comfortable with. A lot of players want to just put in 63 non-land cards that all synergize with their commander, and then they end up losing games to people pongifying a key piece, and then they don't feel good about that. I understand it doesn't feel good to be hit by removal, but removal is a part of Magic the Gathering, and within a certain realm of conversation in the social contract of Commander, there is room for removing people's commanders, removing their game pieces. Understandably, you don't want to go so overboard that, like, you're allowing everybody to play Planeswalker decks with 20 board wipes in them, because that doesn't become a very fun game for anybody except the Planeswalker players. But again, this is a game with a social contract. We can have conversations about, is it okay to counterspell my win con? Anyway, the next comment says, are you wanting to spend 3 hours every game? It's okay for game-ending threats to resolve. Games gotta end sometime. 3 wipes and 3 to 4 spot removal seems sufficient, or 3 wipes and 4 to 6 spot removal. Also, game-ending threats don't need to be removed if they don't immediately end the game for you. And then they went on to say the same thing, that 15 slots for removal, that's an absurd amount in Commander. Again, if you are only running about 4 to 6 removal spells in your deck, then there is only a 1 in 19 chance after you have drawn your opening hand that you will ever have access to a card you need to stop somebody from ending the game for you. That is not a statistically sound amount of times to be able to stop somebody from winning a game. Everybody in Commander should have about a 25% win rate if they are playing at evenly powered pods. So ideally, you should be able to draw the things you need about a quarter of the time. And 1/19 of the... No, that's just not enough. Run about 1/5 or 1/6 of your deck as removal, and you'll have removal about a quarter of the time when you need it. It's okay to rely on some math and stats to keep you from losing multiple games. Again, it's not an absurd amount. Anybody who has played with me or played one of the decks that I've built can attest that having access to all of that removal is a game changer. If you're playing a Voltron deck, having access to counter spells can prevent your one game piece that matters from being taken away over and over and over again. If you happen to be playing a strategy that requires putting 4 to 5 game pieces on the board, being able to defend them with counter spells is important. Being able to get rid of repeated removal effects by exiling them away. Like if somebody's playing a Blink deck and they've got a Reclamation Sage, being able to exile the Rec Sage can be the thing that prevents you from never being able to assemble a winning game state. Getting game-winning pieces on the board is as important as removing game-winning pieces from the opponent's board. If you want the games not to take 3 hours, then there's a simple solution to that. Play faster. I don't want to be a dick and say that that's entirely a skill issue, but it quite frankly is. If the 4 players at the table with 12 to 15, 10 to 15 pieces of removal per deck, which only means they'll see about a third of that removal in a game, cannot still assemble a game-winning board state somehow at the 3-hour mark, that is a problem that the players need to learn how to solve. find a way to assemble game states that aren't as complicated, that can be game-winning states. Get better at politicking with people, make better deals with the other people at your table, or run interaction that specifically protects your cards or is asymmetric so it closes out the game more often. If you've got a green-black deck, In Garrick's Wake is a great card for letting you close out a game because it gets rid of only your opponent's cards, keeping you as the one who's ahead on the board. Abzan decks have access to Dune Blast. Mardu decks have access to Ruinous Ultimatum. These types of effects that all remove cards while also benefiting you can help you close out a game. I'd like to go back to the Sephiroth deck that I have. Massacre Worm is in fact removal, but Massacre Worm uniquely also closes out games. Elish Norn is removal, but she also uniquely has the ability to help you close out games because of her effect. These are cards that 100% disrupt other players' board states, but they also have the ability to aid your board states. It is entirely up to you to make the right deck building decisions to make the most of the removal that you are putting into your decks. And I don't mean to sound condescending when I say that that is entirely on you. It's not just about putting in 15 copies of a card that looks kind of like Lightning Bolt and saying I put in the right amount of removal. Every deck needs certain kinds of removal. Aristocrat decks want removal that will let you sacrifice cards as a cost, because that is not a cost when you're playing an Aristocrat deck. Dungeon decks want cards that have ETBs because they're already built on abusing those. Blinking decks want cards that remove via ETBs because they are built on abusing those abilities. It is on you as the deck builder to find the cards that not only disrupt your opponent's strategies, but aid in your strategy. This way, when you are stopping people from winning the game, you are also advancing your board state to a point where you can win the game. That's how you avoid the 3-hour games. Make sure that the cards you have that are removing cards are also helping your deck's internal strategy. You want to win the game. Your opponents want to win the game. Make sure that you're doing two things at the same time. This is also an important lesson for budget players. When you're a budget player, cards tend to have higher mana values because that's what makes them cheaper financially, is them being more clunky. But the benefit of a lot of those higher mana value cards is they tend to be more modal. For every Swords to Plowshare and Pongify that exists that kills one type of card, there's a Generous Gift or a Beast Within that can kill any kind of card in the game for a couple more mana. You spend more mana on the clunkier card, but you gain access to modality. This next one says, playing more removal just makes games an arms race where you're forced to play cards that are high impact. And because everybody is playing high impact cards, you need more removal. And the cycle repeats, and it becomes a nuclear arms race where the result is nobody gets to play the game. And someone's cards don't get countered or removed, and then the game gets won super quickly if their cards are not removed. Pods with lower power don't need as much removal. Lower power commanders and themes need more space for draw, ramp, synergy to keep the deck moving. It is so incredibly frustrating playing against people who just won't let you even play the game because removal in this game is so undercosted. If you're not going to let me play my commander the entire time, just let me know ahead of time so I can find another table. I play 5 to 8 removal spells, and it is great in my casual playgroup because none of us are playing super powerful and expensive cards that have to be removed or countered as soon as they land. Also, don't diss big Haymaker cards. Some decks don't have as much draw capability because of the color of the commander or budget, and if I'm top decking on turn 6 or 7, I want to draw into a card that will have an effect on the game. So, let's go ahead and point by point go through this. Playing more removal does not make games an arms race. Playing more removal is the response to an arms race. The arms race is something that's going to happen no matter what. You're playing Magic the Gathering with a group of people, and as people find decks that they enjoy, they are going to want to tinker with those decks. They're going to want to put better cards in those decks. The more you love a deck, the more you will start to add things to your deck that will help it get to the end goal better. This is the general way that most decks get upgraded. This is how people end up building decks that are unfortunately stronger than the power level of their pod if they start upgrading more often than person 2, 3, or 4. The Rule 0 conversation, as inadequate as it is important in this scenario, and it is the thing you use to solve the arm race problem. not the removal. The removal is there so that you can play in a variety of pods. Playing in one playgroup is fine, and I have a dedicated playgroup that I play with weekly, but I also have a Commander tournament at a locals that I go to all the time. There's also family I have in other states, and I go to the LGSs in those states when I have the opportunity. Having an adequate amount of removal in your deck allows you to play at multiple play groups with multiple people and meet more friends playing Commander, because then you can adequately slot in to any pod. Whether or not you choose to use your removal in a game is entirely a player choice, but having the tool in your tool belt just in case you need it is also a player choice. You choose whether you want to have adequate tools to deal with a variety of playgroups, and then once you're in the game, depending on the game you're trying to have, you choose how you use those tools. Also, if you're upset that your commander is being removed 5 to 8 times in a game, there are 2 things to consider. One, if your commander is getting removed that many times, that's not the worst thing in the world. You should be building decks in such a way that they do not need the commander to win. The commander is there to give your deck guideposts on how to win. But if you choose a monolith commander that must be on the board for the deck to function, then you're not going to be having a great time if that commander is removed a tons of times. Unless you put adequate ways to reanimate, recur, have a lieutenant, or protect your commander, then you're going to fall into this trap. This is another video that I need to do as well at some point, where I talk about the different ways you can circumvent a commander dying repeatedly. You can have commanders like Henzi that want to die repeatedly. You can have cards that bring your commander back in reanimation decks. You can have lieutenants that do what your commander wants to do, like having a Tatiova in an AC deck. You can make sure that the win con of your deck is not stapled to the commander itself. So, like, if you're playing a landfall deck, your Avenger of Zendikar and Scoot Swarm might be somewhere in there. You don't need the commander out for those cards to have impact when you play them. There are all kinds of important deck building decisions you can make to make sure that losing your commander 5 to 8 times isn't the worst thing in the world. I've spent 15 mana re-summoning a Sephiroth before and having to eat into a treasure package to make it happen, and I won that game. Because it's okay. If your deck is performing and people have to stop you, that's part of the game, and it's a reasonable part of the game for people to have to stop you. If you are building your deck and you say, hey, if you counter my stuff, I'm going to go find another table, then play a different card game. I say that with all the love in the world. If you don't want to be interacted with when your deck is going off, please find a different card game to play that has less interaction. There are tons of incredibly fun games you can enjoy. Yu-Gi-Oh! Monsters are built like brick shithouses. It's very hard to remove the Yu-Gi-Oh! Boss monsters. It's kind of part and parcel to how that game is built. In Pokemon, there is no targeted removal. The entire idea is battling the Pokemon together, so you don't have things that just remove cards from the game, at least not to the same degree you have in games like Magic. If you are playing Magic, however, counter spells, targeted removal, interaction, these are part of the game. And there's one other aspect that I gotta talk about. If somebody is spending removal spells on your commander every single time you play it, then what the fuck is the other 99 cards in your deck doing? Like, I'm dead serious. I'll give an example. I was playing a game with the new Gonti commander, and I'll do a deck video on that when I do another full power deck, because I think that deck is just amazingly fun. But my Gonti was hit with a Pongify early in the game, and there was a Marin of Clan Neltoth on the board, and the Marin on the opponent's board was already at 4 experience counters. And I tried to reason with the table that killing my Gonti doesn't help us win. It just means we're in a worse situation dealing with the Marin player, because they're going to reanimate things like Reclamation Sage, they're going to reanimate their Steve, they're going to reanimate stuff every single turn unless we can thread in near the end phase, killing the commander so that they lose access to the triggers if they spent mana on other things. Playgroup didn't listen, it didn't matter, and the Marin player had to get dealt with by other means throughout the game. So I spent the majority of my game not playing with Gonti, because he's already a 5-mana commander, and by the time I had 7 mana, there were other things I wanted to cast. You want to know what I did? When I had 7 mana, I casted Breach the Multiverse. Feeding the Marin player cards, I know, but it put me in a situation where I was now the dominant player on the board. Didn't have access to my commander, but I had 1 key card from everybody's graveyard. And then after filling their graveyards, I was able to cast Reanimate on my Diluvian Primordial, stealing more cards from everybody's graveyards, because Gonti is a Spell Thief deck, but Gonti's not the only way to steal cards from our opponent's decks when I'm playing that deck. I didn't get to play Gonti until near the end of the game, and when I played Gonti, the Gonti got me a Farseek from the Marin player. That was the only spell the entire game that I got off of the Gonti. And I was still in a position where, had it not been for the tournament timer, I would have won on my turn. One player had 42 life, I had 38 life. With 1 more minute on the timer, I would have won immediately because I would have had access to lowering that player's life total, or alternatively taking my now gigantic board, as I had the dominant board state, and turning it sideways at everybody. And there goes the game. I'm not upset about losing the game. There are things that happen in that will be its own video that I want to talk about. But the point is, I managed, and have managed in multiple games, to play without my commander and just function. Like, if you're playing a Miriam Dragon deck, and every card in your Miriam deck is a high-impact dragon, then those high-impact dragons work without Miriam. If people are killing Miriam, then that's removal they don't have for the other 99 cards in your deck. Play those cards. Why are you building your deck in such a way that your commander is so important that you can't function without it? Your win cons should be in your 99. You should have draw packages in your 99. You should have Haymakers in your 99. You should have all kinds of cards in your 99 that say, oh, you spent 3 cards killing my commander over and over again? Well, boy howdy. I hope you're okay for me to drop a giant creature that wins the game. Like, I don't know what to tell you. Yes, losing your commander a lot of times to removal is annoying in a game of Commander. I wholly understand that. But at the same time, people only have access to so many removal spells unless they're playing a deck like, say, Sephiroth that recurs them nigh infinitely. People have limited access to these tools. So when they are using the tools on your recurable thing, then maybe that's just a sign that the recurable thing is strong and the other 99 cards in your deck need to be pulling their weight a little better now. Like, that's okay. And when Vex says, don't diss big Haymaker cards, I'm not dissing big Haymaker cards. I never want to diss big Haymaker cards. Giant Haymaker cards are some of the most fun things to play in Commander because we don't get a chance to play them in other formats. However, and giant asterisk, when you are playing your deck, you need to have a certain amount of Haymakers and then a certain amount of cards that are not Haymakers. Cards that are little and do incremental things that are good and strong and powerful, but are not massive. I go back to my Sephiroth deck, and for every high-costed card like a Sister Hospitaller, a Karmic Guide, or a Sun Titan, there's a tiny card like a Tortured Existence, a Reanimate, a Phyrexian Reclamation that can help me get there just as much. My Reanimation package runs the gamut of various costing cards for that reason. My removal package has everything from 1-mana counterspells to 8-mana giant creatures that, when they come on the board, change the way the game is played for everybody going forward. That is a perfectly reasonable thing to do. Nobody's saying you can't have those cards. All I'm saying is Commander players have a habit of loving those Haymaker cards so much that they put more Haymakers in their deck than they put other strong but lower costed cards, especially removal pieces. Also, it's very weird to comment about the problems of an arms race in Commander while also talking about wonderful Haymaker cards that are the things that the removal spells are there to answer. I find this comment very confusing for a multitude of reasons. It seems like it's at crossed purposes with a billion different ways to play Magic, and I'm not saying you can't have fun playing Magic, and I'm not saying don't play Magic and just go play other card games. I'm just saying that there are aspects of this game that are perfectly reasonable to play with. Counterspells, exile effects, destroy effects, and if you don't want to deal with those, either build your deck in such a way that it's resilient to those effects, or find out what it is about Magic you actually enjoy. If what you need is playing with a small dedicated play group that doesn't run a lot of removal, then that's fine. That's entirely valid. But it does lower your ability to play with other, more flexible pods. And then we have this comment that says, someone doesn't have to have answers, actually. Remove all of them from your decks. Maybe they just want to see who can pop off harder. No. If you are having a Rule Zero conversation that everybody's going to play a Battlecruiser game, and we're just going to see who's going to be able to pop off the biggest, the hardest, with the biggest, dickest numbers, then that's fine. Have those games. But you cannot force me to have those games. And likewise, you can't force other play groups that don't want to have those games to have those games. Giant Battlecruiser stuff is fun if you want to have the 3-hour-long game where everybody's building the giant 12 billion card board. I used to do that in Standard. I played Simic Tokens back in Ravnica Time Spiral block, and getting access to Doubling Season and Copy Enchantment along with the Thallid package, it felt great getting a giant board of tokens, but then not killing anybody with them because I kept forgetting my combat phase because I was a dumb kid. Like, those effects are fun, and they're really neat, and they make great stories, but there's more to the game than just that as well. Saying someone doesn't have to have answers, I'm sorry, but if you want to be the person that goes into the game and loses every single time, which isn't fun for really anybody, then sure, build your deck in a way that doesn't have answers to your opponent's stuff, and just roll the dice on whether or not you'll glass cannon yourself into victory. If that's how you want to play, that's fine, but recognize there are 3 other players at that table, and unless you've had the conversation with them that you don't want people to target your things with removal, they're going to target your things with removal. Nobody wants to remove all of the cards from their deck that allows them to survive giant Haymaker cards. Again, if this is the type of Magic you want to play, then sure, go ahead. I'm not going to stop you. I just don't think it's the type of Magic everybody should be forced to play. I think if people want to win more games, they need to have decks that are flexible in more pods, because when we're playing Commander, we are playing a social format. So it should be good to play with more people. It's kind of a paradox to have the most social format of any card game ever be set in such a way that only a small dedicated playgroup with a very strict set of rules is able to have a fun game with one another. I don't think that's fun or fair for anyone. I think it's more fun if people are able to play with more people. Go out and meet more friends. Get more networking in with your fellow human beings. Touch the grass, for it is soft. But anyways, those were just some of the comments that I wanted to comment on, and there's probably going to be more on those videos, but these are the ones that I see right now, so I wanted to go ahead and talk about them. And let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Hopefully I wasn't too condescending during any of this. My goal is not to shit on the people who view my videos and literally, like, allow me to survive making content. What I want to do instead is have a dialogue and not have it in my comment section. I don't feel like that's a very wonderful place to do that. I think having the conversation here where I'm able to go, hey, here are my thoughts. Here's why I believe as strongly as I do in what I do about this game. Here's some of my reasonings. And, you know, let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Hopefully this was fun and respectful for everybody, and I didn't step on too many toes. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you haven't already, and as always, everyone, insert into video tagline here. Hey, I just quickly want to give a thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who keep this show running. YouTube and Twitch are a pretty bumpy ride at the best of times, and the stability a Patreon provides me is worth more than I can say here. I'd also like to thank each and every one of my $20 and up patrons here, and they would be Red Joker, Blitzkrieg, Cameron, Dren, Jemshin, Smiling DM, Poundini, Nabbity Babbity, Naomi, Isaac, Agamotto, Jordan, Ravi, Giuni, Kiratorian, Prisma, all of you, Sagitt, I'm not saying that part, and Starlight. And finally, thank you to everyone else that helps keep this channel alive. While you're here, why not check out another video? And thank you for watching.